Sorry, which vote?
You also will participate for online or still voting?
For what?
To nominate
Government council? Yeah, it's happening at ESCAP.
today?
Yes.
ESCAP, not here. I saw ESCAP. Here also.
Sir, I don't understand.
Voting.
Voting, yes. For the election
Here,
for the
yeah,
government
election,
council.
yes.
ESCAP. Because there's a meeting going on here. We can't have election.
This,
Who?
I saw in the calendar.
Yeah.
ESCAP. ESCAP on it.
ESCAP hall is the place where the voting will happen. Yeah. But there, it's like,
As usual.
yeah, it's just like a room where voting happens. There's nothing special going on.
But not like this country, show country.
It's a government council election. Good morning, sir. I saw you and I replied to that.
Ну, тебя распечатали, я понимаю, но я же
Those people are. If you have anybody else, you need to tell us. Yeah. The vehicles I told her already. Good morning to you. I'm very good, thank you. It's more about like what are the priority issues for public requirement. Then the second one is the way forward. And then after that we will have
I'll speak in the first segment.
But this is like a quick, this is tentative.
and this is like there's no I mean yes to apply for the insurance just by raising the flag.
Okay. Speak from.
No. So the first
Who will be
will come up with
Sure. Yeah. I'll tell him to inscribe it.
Yeah.
Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is called to order. This morning, we will start our work with the consideration of Agenda Item 5, Subregional Perspectives on the theme topic, Empowering People and Ensuring Inclusiveness and Equality. Documents pertaining to this agenda item include ESCAP/75/24, the report of the Governing Council of the Special Programme for the Economies of Central Asia on its 13th session, at ESCAP/75/25, Subregional Perspectives on Empowering People and Ensuring Inclusiveness and Equality in Asia and the Pacific. Our discussions will also benefit from a dialogue with representatives from sub-regional organizations and groupings from across the region. They will discuss some of the key priorities for inter-regional collaboration in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as opportunities and mechanisms to facilitate and strengthen partnerships among the multilateral groupings in our region. It is therefore with great pleasure that I invite the Executive Secretary, Ms. Armida Salsia Alice Jabana, to introduce the topic and then to moderate the first panel discussion. Madam Executive Secretary. Thank you.
Somebody raise.
Republic of Korea. Do you want to take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Before moving on to this item, I wonder if maybe you could give us 3 minutes making a little statement about statistical issues that we could not do yesterday. It was a little late. There was a little hiccup within our delegation, and we have representatives from Statistics Korea who would like to make a short statement about our cooperation with ESCAP on statistics. Also, I wonder if you maybe you could allow us a few minutes to give that statement.
Republic of Korea, could we, if you may recall yesterday, we asked if we could continue with statistics this morning and if we could proceed with the Madam Executive Secretary now, and then we will revisit statistics later in the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on sub-regional perspectives on the 2030 agenda. It is the first time that the Commission has engaged in a dialogue with all sub-regional organizations in one session. I would like to briefly explain the rationale. The Asia-Pacific region is a region of great diversity in terms of its socio-economic development and the challenges it faces pursuing the 2030 agenda. We have East Asian economies which have rapidly industrialized. These have harnessed the opportunities of globalization and production networking and have closed infrastructure and other development gaps. Poverty and hunger are issues of the past. Rising inequalities, aging, and environmental sustainability are the new challenges. The Southeast Asian economies have closely followed the East Asian economies in trying to replicate their industrialization-based transformation and participation in regional value chain to close development gaps. They have come together under ASEAN. an extremely successful model of regional cooperation. Today, ASEAN is extending the scope of regional cooperation to the broader region through dialogue partnerships, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and the East Asia Summit. Pacific Island states face many development challenges, especially due to their distant geographies, poor connectivity, and the threat of climate change. South Asian countries, despite good economic growth, have a high concentration of poverty and hunger. Meeting basic social needs such as education, health, sanitation, clean energy, and infrastructure remains a challenge. For some economies, the process of graduating from least developed country status threatens the loss of preferential market access and concessional resources, as was discussed at the special body on our second day deliberations. Finally, Central Asian republics represent another group of countries with different challenges arising from their transition to market economies, and many of them have a landlocked status. Recognizing this diversity, ESCAP has organized its work in 5 more or less homogeneous subregions, namely the Pacific, East and Northeast Asia, North and Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. In the respective subregions, we have subregional offices. ESCAP cooperates with several subregional groupings and intergovernmental organizations such as ASEAN, SAARC, BIMSTEC, PIFS, and SCO to promote regional development. Many of these organizations and groupings are represented here today. I'm also pleased to have the G7 Plus present, a grouping representing countries emerging out of conflicts and fragility, and represented by His Excellency Dr. Dionisio da Costa Babo Suarez, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Timor-Leste. As a broader regional platform of Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP would like to facilitate cross-learning and experience sharing among these groups and strengthen our effort on common priorities where we can complement each other's works. We believe this can help achieve broader regional cooperation to pave the way to an inclusive and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. I would like this agenda item on sub-regional perspective on cooperation for 2030 agenda to become a regular feature of future Commission sessions. I would like to work with you to deepen it over time and create a platform for discussion between ESCAP's sub-regional groupings and intergovernmental organizations. Let me now turn to the panel discussion. Given the wide scope of our discussion, we thought we should have it into 2 parts. The first part, or the first segment, will focus on issues and challenges that the different subregions face in pursuing the 2030 agenda and share their experiences. The second part will consider the ways forward for enhanced partnership between subregional organizations and how ESCAP can facilitate. We will have opportunity to benefit from member states' views after the panelists' interventions. Thank you. So I immediately go here.
May I now invite speakers for panel 1 up here to the podium. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I turn to our distinguished panelists, I would like to invite Ms. Usana Bernanda, who is representing ASEAN. Ms. Usana is the Deputy Director General in ASEAN Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Thailand, which we know that Thailand is the current chair of ASEAN. ASEAN, as I mentioned earlier, is a grouping of 10 Southeast Asian countries and is seen around the world as one of the most successful organizations in fostering regional cooperation and integration. ASEAN also has perhaps the most advanced mechanism of cooperation with the United Nations system as a whole, through a framework of action based on the complementarities between ASEAN Vision 2025 and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, covering all the 3 pillars of the ASEAN community, in which ESCAP contributes actively to cooperation in the economic and socio-cultural pillars. ASEAN has also facilitated the inter-sub-regional cooperation through dialogue, or the so-called ASEAN +1 partnerships with countries in the region and beyond, including through ASEAN +6, which includes China, Japan, Republic of Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand. These 6 countries are also ASEAN's partners in the East Asia Summit and in the Regional Comprehensive Partnership, or RCEP, negotiations that are underway. I would like to ask Ms. Usana to inform all of us the key challenges that ASEAN countries face in achieving SDGs, what are the key priorities that have been identified, and how ASEAN's Secretariat is supporting the member states in their pursuit of the Agenda 2030. I would also like you to briefly talk about how ASEAN is partnering with the UN in general and ESCAP in particular, and how ASEAN is promoting broader regional cooperation in Asia Pacific. So Ms. Usana, the time is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary. And thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our experiences on regional cooperation, especially in fulfilling or realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. First of all, I just want to highlight that the spirit of development cooperation has been deep-rooted in the ASEAN community building. If you look at the Bangkok Declaration, that is the founding document for ASEAN back in 1967, the aspiration of ASEAN to secure the future of peace, freedom, and prosperity for our people is clearly reflected in that document. As you say, through joint efforts and sacrifices, ASEAN will secure for their peoples and for prosperity the blessings of peace, freedom, and prosperity. So over the past 52 years, as Madam Chair has mentioned, we have evolved from the association of 5 countries in Southeast Asia to a community of 10 countries in Southeast Asia. And we hope that in the near future, Timor-Leste can join us in the ASEAN family. And we are working towards accepting Timor-Leste to become our 11th member of ASEAN. As Madam Chair mentioned, we has become one of the most successful example of regional cooperation. The per capita income of ASEAN has expanded 33 times since our inception in 1967 to the year 2016. And the number of people in absolute poverty has fallen from 138 million in the year 2000 to only 44 million in 2015 when we become the ASEAN community. And in that year, the year 2015 marked the launch of the ASEAN community, and the leaders adopted the vision, we call it ASEAN Vision 2025. And in that same year, the UN General Assembly adopted the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So that year, 2015, is a very crucial year for us, both in terms of our regional integration and our commitment towards sustainable development. And the ASEAN Vision 2025 also highlights the ASEAN aspiration to build a politically cohesive, economically integrated, and socially responsible, and a truly people-oriented, people-centered, and rule-based ASEAN community. So this clearly demonstrates the ASEAN determination to build our community that is inclusive and leaves no one behind. The Vision 2025 also underlines the complementarity of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with the ASEAN community building efforts. This is to uplift the standards of living of our peoples. And as Madam Chair mentioned, we have worked closely with our external partners, especially the UN agencies, to promote synergy between the 2 important agendas. And we call this the Complementarities Initiative, which is also included in the ASEAN UN Plan of Action that covered the period of 2016 to 2020. And since the year 2017, Thailand and the UN ESCAP has working closely because Thailand is honored to serve as the ASEAN coordinator for sustainable development cooperation, and we work closely with the UN ESCAP in organizing a high-level brainstorming dialogue on enhancing complementarities between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and we call this dialogue the HLBD. And this year, we organized the 3rd meeting in this series back in March. And as a result of the first HLBD in 2017, Thailand and the UNESCAP and the ASEAN Secretariat jointly published the complementarity report to recommend a framework for actions to take forward the complementarities initiative. This report identified 5 priority areas of regional cross-cutting development catalysts, namely, first, the poverty eradication, second, infrastructure and connectivity, third, sustainable management and sustainable development of management of natural resources. And fourth, sustainable consumption and production. And fifth, we underline the importance of building resilience for our region. And most importantly, the report also recommends flagship projects, including the establishment of the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Studies and Dialogue, or the ACSDSD, which will be one of the key deliverables for Thailand Chairmanship, which will be launched in November this year. And at the third HLBD, on the 29th of March this year, we agreed to develop a complementary roadmap based on the 5 priority areas identified in the report. And Thailand will take the lead in jointly cooperate with ESCAP and ASEAN member states and the ASEAN Secretariat. And we hope that the roadmap will help guide future cooperation and identify concrete ideas, actions to reinforce the synergy in further advancing the complementarities initiative in ASEAN. This roadmap is intended to be submitted to the ASEAN UN Summit at the end of the year for leaders and the Secretary General of the UN to take note. I would like to share with you more information on the center that we are going to establish in Thailand. The ACSDSD will not only promote research and enhance capacity building on sustainable development in ASEAN, but it will also serve as a platform for policy dialogue among ASEAN member states and between ASEAN and our external partners, including the UN agencies. The launch of the ACSDSD will be one of the key institutional deliverables of Thailand ASEAN Chairmanship this year, and it also supports our ASEAN Chairmanship's theme of advancing partnership for sustainability, which aims to foster intra-ASEAN cooperation and cooperation between ASEAN and our external partners to realize the vision of sustainability of things, or sustainability in all dimensions, whereby the sustainable development features prominently along with sustainable security and sustainable economic growth. So to enhance the complementarities initiative and sustainable development cooperation in the region, it is required strong support from and sustained partnerships among all ASEAN member states and interested external partners, including the regional organizations, UN regional commissions here, UN development system, and other international organizations. We have, ASEAN have extensively discussed, and we have closely collaborated with one another. So we would like to share our experience and in development cooperation, including through the complementarity initiative. So we will be willing to exchange and share our best practices and learn from your other regions as well, including through the South-South trilateral and multilateral development cooperation. The ACSDSD will also be a venue for ASEAN to work with other partners and centers in other regions in support of the realization of sustainable development in the Asia and Pacific region. So I look forward to hearing from the panel the ideas on how to synergize partnerships in multilateral context to promote collective efforts toward the attainment of the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Susanna, for highlighting the key SDG challenges and priorities for ASEAN countries and how ASEAN community agenda has been aligned with SDG priorities. Thank you also for highlighting the partnerships that ASEAN has developed over the years with UN ESCAP especially, and also certainly other sub-regions, as well as I take note that you mentioned the potentials of South-South and South-South triangle cooperation in facilitating this kind of initiative forward. Now I would like to turn to our distinguished panelists. In this first part of the session, we have 5 distinguished panelists representing SAARC, the Pacific Islands Forum, Greater Tuman Initiative, and the G7+. In this initial round, I will appreciate if you would limit your remarks to about 5 minutes each. We will have another round on learning from each other. I would like to begin with the G7+, I'm sorry. I have the honor to invite His Excellency Dr. Dionisio da Costa Babo Suarez, Minister of Foreign Affairs Timor-Leste, to speak on behalf of the G7+. As all of you are aware, the G7+ was established in 2010, is an intergovernmental voluntary organization bringing together countries that are either facing active conflict or have recent experience of conflict and fragility. It has 20 member states from Asia, the Pacific, Africa, and the Caribbean, including Afghanistan, Papua New Guinea, and Timor-Leste from among ESCAP members. It facilitates sharing of development experiences between its member states that are coming out of conflicts and facing difficult challenges. It would be very important to listen to your perspective. So, Your Excellency, the time is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Executive Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, the conflict-affected countries have been at the center of attention of an international agenda that includes peacekeeping and military, humanitarian development engagement. Yet these countries are lagging behind in social and economic development, as witnessed by their progress across the MDGs. Most of the international assistance has not been as effective as needed to produce the required results, namely stability, resilience, and development. Overwhelmed by challenges such as conflict, natural disasters, poverty, and lack of sufficient resources, conflict-affected countries have been passive to international policies of humanitarian and development actors founded by principles of neoliberalism. In addition, the associated stigma of fragility has undermined the ownership of conflict-affected countries in setting their pathway towards resilience. During the third high-level forum on aid effectiveness in Accra in 2008, ministers from 7 of the current members of G7+, and that is to be understood, small G7+, not the big G7+. G7 happened to have the opportunity to discuss among themselves common challenges their countries have. Lack of peace, ineffective international engagement, and insufficient institutional capacity were identified to be the common features that contribute to setback on social economic front. The result of such interaction was the conception of the small G7+, that would later be established in 2010 in Dili, Timor-Leste. It is an intergovernmental organization of 20 countries, as has been said, or 20 conflict-affected countries, the small G7+. And the group was formed with the objectives to first advocate for country-led peace and state building to be at the core of any humanitarian and development engagement in countries affected conflict and fragility. Second, to promote peace through national dialogue and reconciliation. And third, to serve as a platform for peer learning, including the sharing of experiences and goals, practices, promotes cooperation among member states. The current chair of this small G7 plus is Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone's Minister of Planning and Economic Development. Given its active role in exemplary leadership, Timor-Leste's former president has been appointed as the eminent person, Mr. Xanana Guzmão. The country convenes at ministerial and technical level regularly and on need basis. The next meeting will be on 26-27 June 2019 in Lisbon, Portugal. The G7 Plus is a unique and first ever self-organized group of countries, as I said, affected by war and conflict, to influence policies related to country affected and conflict and fragility. The group, together with members of International Dialogue of Peace and State Building, developed and agreed upon a new deal for engagement in fragile situations, which was endorsed by more than 40 countries, including Japan, at the 4th High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness on November the 30th, 2011, in Busan, Korea. It is the first international framework that formally recognizes the nexus between peace and state building. So the New Deal has been an aid architecture, setting principles for effective development engagement in fragile situations, and it has influenced development assistance policies of development partners at G7 countries. This advocacy of G7 also contributed to an alternative narrative on fragility that puts country on ownership at the forefront. It has further asserted the indispensability of the role of states. Traditional notion of fragility, as defined and understood by OECD, has caused development and humanitarian actors to rely on non-governmental organizations due to their mistrust in countries' leadership, a phenomenon that has caused fragmentation. Thus, the small G7 Plus was instrumental in securing a standalone goal of peace building and state building, and also for sustainable development goal number 16, SDG number 16, on global agenda of 2030. Among others, the inclusion of goal number 16 manifests the nexus between peace and development and demilitarizes peace building, a concept that was otherwise held widely. The group is recognized within the United Nations as a platform to voice collectively the priorities of conflict-affected countries. And for that reason, the group, which was once led by Timor-Leste, played a very important role in helping to establish and also get some of the countries out of the conflict and situation where it was initially was unable to resolve. For example, in São Tomé Principe, helped to organize an election and registration of election, and also in Guinea-Bissau, almost failed, considered failed country for the last 40 years, and was successfully conducted its election in more than 20 years time, and was able to successfully elect a new government, and has gone on develop its development path. The other successful work of the G7 Plus is to help out with election and also resolving the differences that occurred once in the Central African Republic. So, but there are challenges that actually this organization continue to face. The increasing number of violent incidents in G7 Plus countries calls for scaling up the operation of G7 Plus to be even more active in building and sustaining peace at the country level. Due to the polarization of international politics, addressing fragility seems to have been slowly fading away in terms of attention. Realizing the New Deal principles at the country level has been lagging behind the expectations. The G7 Plus countries need to face the challenge in achieving step towards reforms in their development assistance policies. And also, the other issue that also still facing by the same countries is the lack of statistical data to monitor countries' progress on peace building and state building goals, as well as for sustainable development goals or SDGs, and it makes it difficult to produce evidence. So it is also sadly anticipated that more than 80% of the poorest in these countries living in conflict-affected countries in the world. This requires G7 Plus to undertake concerted efforts to peace building and sustainability and stability, and also require that they stick to one of the platforms to convince countries affected by conflict to mobilizing support and all to make sure that they could get out of this situation and expect to deliver on the benchmark of peace, justice, and effective institutions. So against this context, and in line with the outcome of the fourth ministerial meeting of G7 Plus in the next month in Lisbon, it is expected that they will focus on several points: strengthening the G7 Plus through consolidation of their membership and seeking an observatory status at the United Nations; further strengthening advocacy through creating even more evidence on countries' experience and perspective; promoting dialogue and reconciliation in countries that are in conflict; mobilizing support for the implementation of SDGs in line with the New Deal principles and countries' contexts. This will include convening collective analysis and progress made against SDGs during the high-level political forum in 2019, and also deepening peer learning and fragile-to-fragile cooperation. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your very insightful perspectives. May I now turn to Mr. Sione Teki, who is Director of Political Affairs Division in the PIFIA, or Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. The Pacific Island Forum is a grouping of 18 countries in the Pacific region. I would like to ask Mr. Sione to share the perspective from the Pacific Islands Forum on the key challenges the sub-region face and the role that the PIF Secretariat is playing in assisting the member states. Mr. Sione, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and allow me, through our Secretary General, Dame Meg Taylor, to convey her apologies for being unable to participate in this important high-level panel. And allow me also to acknowledge participants from the Pacific who are members which our Secretariat represents. And it's certainly a privilege to be part of this dialogue, particularly because it is a first of its kind. From the Pacific Islands Forum, I wish to highlight two broad interconnected areas important to the Pacific in terms of interregional collaboration, which are oceans management and the challenge posed by climate change and climate-induced disasters, and inclusive economic development, taking into account social factors. But before that, allow me just to provide context about the Pacific region and the tendency to think of it as being made up of small and remote island nations, which in a way restricts the Pacific's ability to fully realize its development aspirations. When the Honorable Prime Minister of Samoa coined the phrase Blue Pacific and made reference to the Blue Pacific continent, which as an identity was subsequently endorsed by forum leaders in 2017, they understood the potential and wealth of the oceans as a key to the sustainable development of the Pacific region. SDGs 14 in this regard is of utmost importance to the Pacific region because it empowers the Pacific to think of itself as large ocean states and to take ownership of its development ideals. But this cannot only be said for the Pacific region, and indeed the same can be said for the Asian region as well, who is heavily reliant on the oceans as a sort of food security. From an economic point of view, the fisheries sector for the Pacific provides the predominant source of income for most Pacific Island states. That being said, the amount of income that the Pacific receives from the fisheries sector is still dwarfed by the larger countries, including Asia. Moreover, the amount of money lost by the region to illegal, unregulated, unreported fisheries is a key concern. However, as the Forum Chair, His Excellency President Wanga, remarked on Monday this week, Forum leaders are deeply concerned that the livelihood and development aspirations of their people will not be realized due to the deepening threats to the world's oceans and seas through pollution and exploitation, as well as the interconnected impact of climate change, sea level rise, and increasing natural disasters. Indeed, forum leaders expressed this directly to the United Nations Secretary General in their meeting in Fiji earlier this month. Similarly, forum leaders also recognized through the Boy Security Declaration of 2018 that climate change remains the single greatest security challenge for the Pacific. The first quadrennial Pacific Sustainable Development Report also denotes the climate crisis and increasing frequency and intensity of natural disasters continues to be the most critical issues affecting the Pacific region's development. Warming seas are causing significant coral bleaching. The rising sea level are affecting Pacific countries' food and water security, as well as their very existence and sovereignty. Thus, issues relating to maritime boundaries and the need for permanent recognition of baselines are key issues for securing the Blue Pacific continent. Increased climate-induced disasters significantly impact on the region's tourism and aquaculture sectors. The cross-cutting nature of this issue also affects the most vulnerable, women, children, and persons with disabilities. The Asia countries, due to their large population, contribute a significant portion of global carbon emissions. A key issue worth considering for further collaboration with other sub-regions is the need to work together to advocate at the sub-regional, regional, international level for more ambitious targets for the reduction of greenhouse gases. On a more technical level, there is an opportunity for cross-learning and transfer of knowledge, systems and technology for building climate resilience, disaster risk reduction and response, noting that Asia region has a lot of experience in this area. From the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, the key work, because of the nature of the organization, is around policy, as well as advocacy and helping our members to advocate these key issues in the international arena. And the forum stands by all its members in taking forward these key issues as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sioni Teki, for sharing the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat perspective. I would like now to invite Mr. Tuguldur Bajiku, Director of the Greater Tumen Initiative Secretariat, or GTI in short. GTI, as we know, is an intergovernmental initiative bringing together 4 Northeast Asian countries, namely China, Republic of Korea, Mongolia, and the Russian Federation, and is an important forum of regional cooperation. Mr. Tuguldur, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you all, and thank you for the kind introduction. When I was put with a question, how the sub-regional initiatives and mechanisms like the organizations that are presented today could promote the collaboration themselves, I was thinking, us being basically an intergovernmental platform, functioning as a secretariat to promote and facilitate the intergovernmental dialogue and to strengthen the mechanism, bring discussions to life, support with research and mobilize resources to bring projects, to implement projects aimed at a common prosperity in the region. I was thinking to give my input from an institutional perspective. So basically, again, us being, and like many others represented here today, being a platform to function, to bring the dialogue together, to materialize those discussions, and provide with technical expertise and research, and that that puts together different perspectives into a common vision. I would like to basically mention about a couple of priorities. So priority for the Greater Tumen Initiative has been for the decades among different sectors that we are looking into, basically physical or transport connectivity and facilitation of trade. So let me concentrate on those 2 points. Having a lot of work to do to improve cross-border infrastructure connectivity. At GTI, we look into improvement of cross-border infrastructure and logistics, as well as expansion and improvement of an upgrade of regional transport corridors. So at our long-term outlook is to develop and strengthen the integrated intermodal transport network as a whole. So our long-term objective is basically to come up with a intergovernmental management structure that for coordination and that looks into ensuring the operability and functionality of those transport corridors. So again, it is to bring to develop besides the dialogue that we're having now on the policy level, at the expertise level. We are looking into creation of this intergovernmental mechanism that could, a sustainable mechanism that looks after the function of those corridors. So again, my take on this is that whatever the sub-regional mechanisms do at the sub-regional level could be replicated between the sub-regions, right? So basically, again, whenever we talk about collaboration between sub-regional mechanisms, we could look into, let's just say, in a longer term, creation of structures and mechanisms for coordinating development projects, as well as harmonizing the regulatory systems across sub-regions to support seamless interaction and freer flow of goods and people. So again, same approach for trade facilitation. So again, to give you the background, what we do at GTI is that our main priorities were for the last few years is basically cross-border paperless trade and implementation of a single window system. So whenever we talk about those two aspects, it's been the expert level exchange to define items and areas for more developed systems for data exchange, and again harmonization of regulations across borders, right? So basically trade facilitation for us at the moment, and probably for a foreseeable future, is a development and creation of seamless interface across borders. And again, I think this concept, this approach could be replicated between sub-regions. So building a platform for, I think everything starts with expert level information exchange. So building a mechanism, platform for information exchange, and looking into more sustained collaboration in terms of harmonizing regulatory aspects of cross-border trade. So I think, again, to sum up, I would say that the initiatives and perspectives that have been put on the sub-regional level could be replicated between sub-regions. So I think what the role of regional infrastructures, regional mechanisms like ESCAP here, I think is doing today, right? Bringing together, serving as a platform, serving as an infrastructure, serving as an institution to bring together the sub-regions. While these sub-regional mechanisms, their main assignment and function is to bring governments together to promote, facilitate, and sustain the intergovernmental dialogue. I think, although ESCAP is actually doing it on the regional level, perhaps from the sub-regional perspective, what it could also do is to, again, provide with a platform and an institution to bring sub-regions together, right? So sub-regional governments, sub-regional institutions taking the assignment of the intergovernmental dialogue, whilst the institutions like ESCAP could provide with analysis, some technical support and technical expertise to materialize those discussions. And the reason that I'm, again, putting this concept up front is some of the recent developments with our collaboration with ESCAP, all right? Basically, besides, looking for different opportunities for more conventional collaboration for joint project development and implementation, we also recently trying to promote more institutionalized and systematic collaboration, again, for more comprehensive and intensified information exchange to identify and implement activities. And basically, the keyword is to complementarity, right? So to complement regional initiatives and activities with our sub-regional platform, sub-regional capacity and resources. So again, I think those keywords that I just mentioned in the past few minutes could be the approach and basically the baseline for commencement and development of intra-sub-regional dialogue and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bajiku, for your very insightful remarks and even some already, yes, several suggestions. May I now turn to Mr. Chanchal Sarkar, who represents the SARC Secretariat, which is based in Kathmandu. As we know, SARC is an association of 8 South Asian countries. 4 of SARC member states are classified as LDC, which are Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. All of these countries, with the exception of Afghanistan, are getting ready to graduate from LDC status in the next 3 to 4 years. Mr. Sankar is Director of the Economic Trade and Finance Division at the Secretariat. If I may, Mr. Sankar, I would like you to please summarize the key SDG challenges that the South Asia sub-region is facing and how SARC as a regional organization is addressing them, especially the LDC member states that are graduating. Mr. Sankar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, let me take this opportunity to thank the ESCAP for organizing this experience sharing, and this is an effective and timely initiative, and we would like to see such kind of event more so that we can learn from each other. If you see the charter of SARC, then the core of the charter, it's the welfare improvement of the people of the region through greater integration in the economic, social, and cultural areas. These are the main areas where, so therefore, like the sustainable development is the core of the very charter of the SARC process. Now, since its establishment in 1985, there are a lot of areas on the economic cooperation and social cooperation. There are institutions, legal agreements which are as big as 34 in number, which is exactly the double of the SDGs number. So therefore, we have enough instrument. We are trying to deal and address the SDGs through our process of deepening cooperation in trade, agriculture, rural development, environment, and climate change, connectivity, and various other issues. On the social we have a social charter identifies a number of targets to achieve in a number of areas, including the promotion of health, empowerment of women, development of youth, protection of children, especially the girl child. We also do cooperate with we have MOUs with a large number of international organizations. We have MOUs with even ESCAP, and a lot of activities have also been done on the issue of food-related food bank and seed bank. Then the SARC's objective, overarching objectives is already the poverty alleviation. But then there are some kind of paradox we are facing currently, in the sense while the South Asian economy is the fastest growing economy, in the current year it is 6.9% growth, and next year it is going to be 7.1%. Some of the current members would be even more, but still be somehow the 1/3 of global poverty is there in here. So there is a challenge. We need to translate this high economic growth into the generation of employment, further reduction of poverty. We have been able to reduce. We also need to work on the climate change issues. In fact, the SARC Environmental Action Plan, the Dhaka Declaration, and the Climate Change Declaration, Thimphu Declaration, also has a framework to deal with environment and disaster management. Now, the core of the efforts or framework or process has been the welfare improvement through direct reduction in poverty, and also dealing, because the SARC is an area, as Chair pointed out, there is a very big country like India, 1.3 billion, and as small as Maldives. So therefore, and there is a diversity, and there is a various degree of risk on the climate change issues. And then we have ministerial level committee, and in order to deal the various issues on economic trade, connectivity, energy, environment, the SARC has developed many institutions. There are 5 regional centers. One is agriculture center, one is energy center, one is health, STAG on tuberculosis and center. Then we have established 4 specialized bodies like SARC Development Fund, which provides finances to the economic infrastructure project. Now recently the SARC Development Fund has opened up for social window, and it is funding the social projects, which would certainly have the positive impact on various sustainable developmental goals, including poverty and environmental issues. We have, in order to accelerate intra-regional trade as well as the inter-regional trade, there is the standard body, SARC standard body has been established with a view to smoothen the fairer trade standards. Then we have dispute settlement for with the view to reduce the dispute settlement. We have SARCO Arbitration Council, and also we have established South Asian universities, where a lot of education are given to the members and foreigners on various streams. So on the issue of connectivity, there are on the CURD, like there is motor vehicle agreement, the air and railway service agreements are being tried. On the issue of services, because today the investment and services, like investment, there's a sustainable investment agreement is another issue, is that where the protection of investment, which is sustainable investment and clean investment, that is also being tried, but it's in the process. And the services agreement, we have been able to sign the agreement of SAARC trade and services. Today, we know that bulk of the investments are taking place across the world through the services. So we hope to have the bring in effective investment through the services for the sustainable development goal. But then some of the areas we like for intra-regional trade, it still need to improve because we are merely around 5% as compared to ASEAN, which is around 20%. So and also we need to translate and this high growth into the more employment generation and the direct reduction on the poverty, which our system, the SAARC process has very well defined process and committees and ministerial level decision process, and we are regularly working towards attaining such goals. But then this kind of interactive session among the groups would certainly improve to find ways where we can improve together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarkar, for your very insightful comments, or remarks, and for highlighting the key challenges that the South Asian countries are facing and how SAARC is playing the role to facilitate further cooperation across the countries in the sub-region. Distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard quite diverse experiences coming from certainly diverse set of sub-regional organizations. And we would like to end this segment, this first segment of our session, as one of the objectives of our session is to facilitate cross peer learning among the sub-regional organization. If I may, I would like also to give a certain focus on lessons learned, at least from still a very, very early discussion among the sub-regions. I would like to turn to all the panelists, and giving about, well, let's say 1-2 minutes, for each one of you, by way of you giving your closing remarks, if I may, by highlighting what you thought, was since the first segment is the key issues, the key important development challenges of issues, that each one of you face in your particular sub-region, that you think that these are the issues that can be take on forward, by way of strengthening cooperation, whether it's across the sub-region, by way of peer learning, or also with ESCAP, or with other regional organization for that matter. So if I may, I would like to start with maybe by giving the time, but apologize, a very, very, very short time, about, well, let's say 1-2 minutes each, from the far right, maybe from the far right, if I may, from representative from the Pacific Island Forum. Just by way of concluding remarks, 1-2 minutes, maybe just the keywords, that you think is the most important issues that you think can be cooperated further across the sub-regions and or things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think in terms of some of the key issues that the Pacific region would like to see closer collaboration is what I've already mentioned around climate change, disaster risk reduction, as well as corporations around ocean-related issues. I think Asia region has a lot of experience, particularly around disaster risk reduction, disaster management, and that's something that there can be a lot of further collaboration on with other organizations as well as Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you. So, please.
Thank you, Chair, for this additional opportunity. So I think to pick one, right, I would say that we could start with, again, information and expert level exchange in terms of implementation of the trade facilitation agreement, UNW trade facilitation agreement. So it's again, it's a vast task. It's an enormous big framework, but I think there are a lot of items and sectors and provisions that the sub-regions together could look into for, let's just say, joint implementation through means of peer learning, information exchange, and capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Suarez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to highlight that the fact that G7, the small G7 Plus has become an increasingly influential constituency on the global stage, it has actually played some very important roles, particularly on policy advocacy at the global level, and placing the countries at the helm of development agenda setting, and while as partners are playing a supporting role rather than leading role in resolving conflict in these conflict-affected states. For example, two countries have recently signed peace agreements, South Sudan and the Central African Republic. And also, let me just highlight the fact that New Deal implementation progress have achieved in terms of conducting fragility assessment in 8 countries, which provided good guidance to governments and donors to operate in the conflict-affected areas. And also, another important issue is the fact that the G7, I want to highlight the fact that the G7 is also progressing well, not at the global level and also at the regional level, working in partnership with leading institutions to address fragility, conflict resolution, and implementation of SDGs. The annual event of ESCAP, such as this, in hosting the SDG monitoring in Bangkok, where we are now, is one of the examples of how lessons can be learned through the peer learnings and progress can be achieved. And this we could use to share and replicate among member states and also both in Asia Pacific and also in other parts of the world to actually reel and also together bring all these countries to another level of achieving, in its effort to achieve the objectives of SDGs and MDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Usanna, please.
Yes, thank you. From my own assessment, I think there are 2 key issues that we need to address. The first one is the development gaps between, members in ASEAN member states, because you have countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, who are more advanced in terms of economic development, and we still have some members who are in the LDC groups. So how to address these gaps so that we can have consensus on key issues, key policy issues is very important. And the second issue is perhaps the how to address cross-cutting issues, issues like connectivity, climate change. All these are cutting across all 3 pillars of the ASEAN community. How can we have a mechanism to effectively address the issue and make sure that there will be no duplication, and each pillar and each sector bodies know what they have to do in order to synergize the efforts that each specific pillar is doing to help address all these issues effectively. Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Usanna. Last but not least, Mr. Sarkar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the core lies with the economic cooperation. Uh, Without the trade and investment and the growth, it is perhaps less possible to attain the employment, eradication of poverty, and also to deal with the emerging challenge of climate change. So therefore, the trade facilitation, investment and trade has to be the core of all any initiatives, but also in order to take new policy initiatives, the role of the statistics is also very important, because unless we know the kind of data we are generating, we need to have an informed decision on the issue, on the area of statistics, and also the information exchange. This kind of information exchange, we need to learn from each other much more than before. So this way, and then capacity building, like for example, the countries which will be graduating from the LDCs to LDCs to developing countries. So these, how to cope with these, and also the rural development and the climate resilient agriculture, these areas, and finally that investment, as I said, that's is linked to the capital market, because we need at the end of the day, we need finance to finance the big projects infrastructure. So the capital market capacity building is also very important for us. So therefore, these are the areas where we need to take our cooperation further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the conclusion of this first segment of our session. I would like to thank all the panelists for their insightful remarks and the rich discussion, as well as I think the last segment, the 2 minutes, although 2 minutes, but I really jotted down a very, very, concrete issues that each one of you already conveyed to all of us, so which is very helpful for the next round or the next segment of our session. I wish to thank all panelists for their very insightful remarks and the rich discussion. Let all of us give a big round of applause. Now I would like to move to the second part of our session on the Agenda 5, which focuses on the way forward with sub-regional cross partnership and cooperation. I would like to invite Dr. Nagesh Kumar, who is the Director of UN ESCAP's South and Southwest Asia Office in New Delhi, to moderate this segment of our discussion. Thank you.
Good morning. distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure and honor for me to moderate the second part of this Agenda 5 discussion. This is actually a continuation of the earlier part, which we just finished, which was moderated by our distinguished Executive Secretary, and which raised issues and challenges, which we can now take further and discuss how we can make use of partnerships. And all of them recognize that there is something to be gained for pursuing 2030 agenda from sub-regional and regional cooperation. Now we can look at the modalities of those partnerships and cooperation. When we talk about partnerships and cooperation, we are essentially talking here of two types of partnerships. One are the partnerships between the respective sub-regional organizations or intergovernmental organizations and ESCAP, and the other between the sub-regional organizations themselves, where also ESCAP can play a role, such as by providing a platform like this for them to come together and exchange experiences. Now, coming to the first one, there are some emerging patterns of partnerships developing between the sub-regional organizations and ESCAP. And the most developed one is, in that respect, is a partnership between ESCAP and ASEAN, which we heard Ms. Usana talking about the complementarity document which drove a plan of action, and in which the United Nations agencies, including ESCAP, have been regularly exchanging lessons learned and experiences, development experiences, and coordinating the actions and activities for the benefit of our overlapping member states. There are many other sub-regional organizations, including those represented at this table and in the room, which have signed memoranda of understandings or MOUs with ESCAP, and those provide some frameworks of collaboration and partnership. Some of these MOUs, as usual, are very active, some are not so active, and how we can rejuvenate them and make them very active. What are the lessons to be learned from those which are very active, and whether we can extend their scope to be as comprehensive and as dynamic as the partnership between ASEAN and United Nations, and including ESCAP. The second type of partnerships, as I mentioned in the beginning, cover those between the sub-regional organizations and, for exploiting the synergies. As Madam Executive Secretary highlighted in her introductory remarks, Asia has grown to become a very diverse region. And there are diversities which provide for complementarities which can be harnessed for mutually beneficial cooperation for development. Just to give you an example, the capital abundant East Asia region, bringing together or partnering with capital scarce South Asia region and labor abundant South Asia region, how productive and mutually beneficial that partnership could be for fostering and for achieving the Agenda 2030 goals. So those are the kind of issues we have before us in this part of the segment. Again, there are emerging patterns. There are some cross sub-regional groupings which have developed, like BIMSTEC, which combines 5 South Asian countries with Myanmar and Thailand from ASEAN. There is, of course, ASEAN itself has done a lot, as we heard in the previous segment, in bringing together the subregions or extending the ASEAN cooperation beyond Southeast Asia. And we heard how regional comprehensive economic partnership is bringing together ASEAN +6 in a trade and comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which is in the final stages of negotiation. And then we have a very interesting new regional organization, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is straddling across the subregions. It has the members from Central Asian republics, the Northeast Asian countries, and now joined by India and Pakistan from South Asia. So there are many models emerging, and many of the ESCAP's programs, sectoral programs, whether it is transport, energy, or ICT connectivity, or trade agreements like APTA or the Framework Agreement on Cross-Border and Paperless Trade, they bring together member states from across the subregions and provide a broader regional framework. But as a broader regional platform with universal membership of all Asia-Pacific member states, ESCAP can play a role of bringing together the subregional groupings, and it was mentioned also a number of times in the previous segment, to enable them to exchange experiences and facilitate exploitation of synergies. So with these introductory words, I would like to turn to our distinguished panel, which overlaps with the previous panel. As you would have noticed, there's a couple of groupings which were in the previous one and are also in this because of the issues that we are discussing. So I will go around the panel following the pattern set by the Madam Executive Secretary and pose these two questions for them to respond in about 5 minutes. And then we can go for the closing remarks, another round at the end, 1 or 2 minutes each. So may I begin with the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, and given the vulnerability and capacity gaps of the Pacific Island economies, partnerships assume greater salience in pursuing 2030 agenda. So I would like to invite you, Mr. Sion Tekiteki, and we have heard you before in the previous panel, on the Pacific Island Forum's Secretariat perspective on partnerships with ESCAP on the one hand and with the other subregions on the other. You have raised a number of issues and challenges that the Pacific Island countries face. So what kind of partnerships you see would be most productive with ESCAP and with other subregional organizations? You have the floor, Mr. Tekiteki.
Thank you, Chair. I think in short, what the Pacific region is looking for is genuine partnership. Partnership made up of mutual trust. So some of the key principles that really does make for lasting partnerships. The Pacific region in general is a very congested region. In terms of the various dialogue partners that engage with countries, in terms of the number of regional as well as sub-regional organizations that exist in the region. So there is a real need for genuine partnerships. You reference MOUs, partners come in and out of the region, entering into various MOU arrangements, and they tend to gather dust because a lot of it don't last. So the question is, why is that the case? I think, you know, if you take a skeptical perception, a lot of the partnerships tend to be driven by the pursuit of funds and financing. And that in general tends to influence how partners act in a certain way. I think if you're talking about partnerships with ESCAP, I think a mechanism such as this is very helpful as an initial phase. But I think what is really required is some sort of arrangement where there is agreement to certain priorities in which there is ownership and which we can take forward as a grouping. Otherwise, partnerships won't work because the interests are not aligning. There needs to be coherence in how we act, particularly with our members. There's a tendency for agencies, sub-regional, regional, international, to act in pursuit of their various initiatives. And when you're talking about small island states in the Pacific with very small administrations, that tends to be a burden as opposed to an actual assistance to countries, because they don't have the absorptive capacity to deal with these various organizations coming into the countries. This is a key issue, particularly if you're looking at administrations with only one or two focal officers who are responsible for a number of various partners. So I think trying to integrate our work, coming up with some sort of initiative where we can have joint missions, things like that, I think will be very helpful for the countries. Because at the end of the day, as agencies and as Secretariat, we're there to support our members, but sometimes we end up being more of a burden than actual assistance, just because of the various duplication that goes on within the space to which we operate. So rather than sort of talking about, you know, specific mechanisms, I think, you know, asking ourselves the question, what is genuine partnership? And how do we work within that space? Make sure there's inclusivity, making sure that all the various stakeholders are involved in the work. That tends to generate a lot more ownership and tends to mean lasting, genuine partnerships. So I guess there's just a few observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teki. I think it's a very valid point that you have made. Ownership is certainly very important rather than just paper MOUs, which do not go very far. Ownership and shared agenda, shared, sort of expertise and joint missions are all very important key issues that you have raised. Thank you for those thoughts. Let me now turn to our second panelist, and that is the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat. As we know, Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat brings together three economic powerhouses of Asia: China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea. So I have the honor to invite Mr. Lee Yong-hyun, Secretary General of the Trilateral Cooperation Organization Secretariat, and to provide the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat's perspective on the two questions, namely the approach to partnership with ESCAP and other sub-regional groupings. Mr. Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, Dr. Kumar. Distinguished delegates, participants, and ladies and gentlemen, I'd first like to thank you and ESCAP for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and perspectives with regard to the strategic importance within the region and between the regions. So before getting started, when I look around this conference room, I presume that most the participants are not so much familiar of the historical background of our CJK Trilateral Corporation and do not recognize the existence of our organization, Trilateral Corporation Secretariat. So please allow me to introduce our CJK Trilateral Corporation as well as our organization as brief as possible without going into detail. As you may not know, this year marks 20th anniversary of Trilateral Corporation, and our organization has become 8 years old. Our Trilateral Corporation was actually initiated in the process of coping with the ASEAN financial crisis, which broke out here in Thailand in 1997. At the time, China, Japan, Korea, 3 leaders were invited for the consultation with ASEAN leaders to jointly overcome this urgent crisis. 3 leaders gathered together for the first time in the history and had the informal breakfast meeting, according to the suggestion of then Japanese Prime Minister Obuchi. That's the historic starting point of Trilateral Corporation. Since then, remarkable progress and achievements have been made in a wide range of areas. 10 years later, this time, the global financial crisis occurred. Taking the opportunity of this crisis, 3 countries decided to upgrade the current level of the summit, and they decided to hold independent trilateral summit apart from the ASEAN Plus 3 mechanism. So we came to realize that whenever 3 countries are facing some huge challenges, the level of cooperation was reinforced and consolidated very ironically. That doesn't mean we are expecting another crisis. In the meantime, our organization, TCS, was inaugurated in 2011, 8 years ago, to institutionalize the existing cooperation in a more integrated and efficient manner. So in a nutshell, we can fairly say that our Trilateral Corporation Secretariat is characterized by the unprecedented, the unique, neutral, and future-oriented intergovernmental organization which was established to promote trilateral cooperation, finally aiming at the peace, stability, and prosperity in this region. So currently, with the Trilateral Summit on the top, 3 countries now operating the more than 70 intergovernmental consultative mechanism, including 21 ministerial level meeting. Personally, I believe that this establishment of the TCS, our organization, actually opened a new chapter in the history of Northeast Asia region. Why? Because this region has never experienced some permanent consultative mechanism, not only to deal with issues of common interest, but also to resolve some regional conflicts among neighboring countries. And now I'm going to the main theme of today's session. So I believe today's topic seems to relate it to the question, what are we supposed to do for our sustainable development of Asian regional cooperation? So let me begin by saying that we are now living in such a turbulent but deeply interconnected and intertwined global village where requires all the more collective efforts and wisdom together. Global economy is now still in a sluggish recovery mode and facing new challenges and opportunities. The Asian economy is also in the middle of historic transition. So many people do not agree that we are now going through the era of hyper uncertainty. So many people are deeply worried about the potentially possible the negative impact which can be triggered by some ongoing situation. Just to name a few, the rise of protectionism and unilateralism, and globalization. Globalization is kind of new terminology which replaced globalization. So many people are also worried about that. As a result of this globalization, we are witnessing that cross-border trade, investment, capital flow, and global value chain has all been the shrinking or stagnating. And another crisis, the potential widespread fallouts or ramifications of post-Brexit and growing competition involving the first industrial revolution. An ever deteriorating trend of US-China trade war now developing into economic war. So, and the still precarious and unstable the security environment in Northeast Asia surrounding Korean Peninsula. So against this backdrop, I believe that it is high time for us to deliberate on not only how to cope with these huge imminent challenges, but also to maintain regional economic governance by increasing interconnectivity within the region and between the regions. One of the options we can take into consideration is to develop East Asia Economic Community serving as a regional economic growth engine. As we know, East Asia is one of the most economically dynamic regions in the world. This region has already emerged as the largest economic bloc in the past few decades in terms of 30% of the world's population, 27% of the world's GDP, and 26% of the world's trade volume. So, based on these great potentials, well-established East Asia Economic Community will create a mega market and revitalize the regional economy as well as global economy. Of course, this is not an easy task, another very challenging task. It is no doubt that there exist so diverse and conflicting perspectives as well as tremendous obstacles to prevent further cooperation or integration. Therefore, it is crucial for the multi-stakeholder countries in this region to strive for more open, transparent, inclusive, and rules-based integration within the consensus of all the relevant stakeholders. So, what are we supposed to do? I believe that, I'm quite sure that the more frequent and candid communication is the most important and effective vehicle to harmonize and reconcile existing different perspectives and find best solutions. In this regard, I'm quite sure that today's sub-regional dialogues organized by UN ESCAP serve as very meaningful platform in terms of building as many as possible in terms of building some connecting bridges, as many as possible within the region and between the regions. So I sincerely hope that UN ESCAP continue to organize this kind of sub-regional dialogues to provide enough opportunities for the representative of sub-regional organization and various stakeholders to meet each other and discuss the desirable future vision of Asia-Pacific region. Of course, TCS, our organization, would also like to play the leading role as one of these connecting bridges of peace, stability, and prosperity over troubled waters. Now, I'd like to put forward some suggestions to make our trilateral cooperation more sustainable and prosperous in the years to come. Number one, it is no doubt that Trilateral Summit is the biggest driving force to push forward cooperation. But unfortunately, Trilateral Summit has been suspended from time to time due to the political ups and downs caused by strained bilateral relations. So, Trilateral Summit should not be influenced by rather unstable bilateral relations and need to be more institutionalized without any interruption in terms of regional cooperation. Number two, another important driving force comes from ever-increasing people-to-people and social-cultural exchanges. So in order to more facilitate and more accelerate this trend, 3 countries are now discussing the creation of a Trilateral Cooperation Fund, TCF. So I believe that the creation of this TCF will make great contribution to the advancement of the current level of cooperation, both in quantity and quality. Number 3, CJK Trilateral Cooperation is kind of a strategic vision for 3 countries to continue to push forward mid to long-term perspective. So 3 countries now came up with their own strategic visions and working very hard to publicize their own policy and strategy, as well as to get some support from international society through very active and competitive public diplomacy. As you know, in case of China, Belt and Road Initiative and Chinese Dream and the community with a shared future for mankind. In case of Japan, diplomacy that takes a panoramic perspective of the world map, kind of the global diplomacy, and free and open in the Pacific strategy. What about Korea? Northeast Asia plus community of responsibility, new northern policy, new southern policy, and East Asia railway community. ASEAN insists that ASEAN must be at the core of the regional architecture, what is called ASEAN centrality. So in the process of each country pursuing its own strategic goals and visions without converging into common grand strategy or without finding any common ground, commonality, 3 countries may attempt to engage in more competition than in cooperation. So it is very important imperative for stakeholder countries in this region to try to find common ground and build consensus by enhancing mutual understanding of respective strategy. For this purpose, 3 countries now established the networking of trilateral cooperation think tank. So I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency Mr. Lee, for sharing some very insightful thoughts, including the retreat of globalization as a phenomenon. I mean, the rising protectionism, unilateral actions, and trade wars, which create a new stimulus or impetus for regional cooperation, exploiting the synergies between us in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think that sets the background or context for deepening this discussion that we have started. And you have also highlighted the importance of people-to-people exchanges for deepening any cooperation. And in that context, what TCS is doing. And also you hinted or shared some information about each of the countries in the TCS is having very deep relationships with ASEAN, and whether a common ground could be created for sharing and coordinating the strategies of cooperation. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing with us your perspectives. Now, I'd like to turn to SAARC. Mr. Chanchal Sarkar has earlier talked about the key challenges that South Asian countries face in pursuing the sustainable development goals, and how concentration of poverty and hunger, despite the very high rapid economic growth, which is not translating into enough jobs and poverty reduction. So those came out very clearly in your earlier remarks, Mr. Sarkar. Now, if we could hear your perspectives from the SARC Secretariat side on the partnership that SARC has with ESCAP, and your thoughts about how to deepen it further, and also the SARC's, partnerships or cooperation with other sub-regional groupings in the region. Any thoughts, any information about that? So you have the floor, Chanchan.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me this opportunity. And I cannot stop myself emphasizing the importance of this kind of fora where we can exchange information. I would urge ESCAP the possibility to formalize this kind of and take it, because we also need to exchange of information on various important issues, like increasingly these paradoxical situations are emerging across the global economy. Today, the most challenge are being faced by the large number of countries, particularly the SARC region, is the poverty issues, and they need a lot of investment. Now, the investment, what are the kind of investments we are looking for? Like, we need real and effective investment, like, and the genuine kind of investment. So therefore, MOUs for trade facilitation, and we need to go back to the already signed MOUs. Some of them are active, some of them are not so active. So therefore, we need to go back and revisit the MOUs and what are the scope and how we can enlarge this so that the changing environment and changing new demands can be addressed. For example, we need capacity building. We also need to understand how this organization works. Like some of them are purely intergovernmental. So therefore, as a secretariat, we need to take along the governments also. So therefore, there has to be some element of that where the governments are also actively participate. Maybe the existing governmental forum or regular meeting that's on the sidelines, or with this same we can organize a similar meeting. Then we also need to address the diversified or heterogeneous interest, like their project-based collaboration would be desirable. And I think we also need to have some sort of exchange program on a continuous basis. Like it cannot be like at one-stop shop. Maybe some secretariat, we need to have a constant kind of exchange, maybe exchange of officers or technical support, and on the issues of capacity building. Maybe ESCAP can consider providing some capacity building session, and maybe on new areas and emerging areas also can be considered. So therefore, this would be very important, and also the trade facilitation aspect that should be the foremost. So therefore, these are the and existing MOUs. We need to go back. These are the thing I think on the connectivity also. We need to think through, and the another important issues on the financial inclusion. So the financial inclusion is an inclusive growth. These two areas we need to go back and think through. For the time being, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarkar, for highlighting how sharing and coordinating our activities between SARC Secretariat and ESCAP Secretariat in the areas of capacity building, for instance, for trade facilitation, transport connectivity, other aspects of connectivity, financial inclusion could be very, very helpful. And so we take note of that point, and deepening and strengthening the MOU and taking it forward would be the issues for the future. Thank you very much for that. And now I turn to a grouping which brings together, as I said earlier, some members of South Asia, some countries of South Asia, actually 5 of them, and Myanmar and Thailand from Southeast Asia. So it's a grouping called BIMSTEC, and we have Mr. Pankaj Hajarika, Director of the BIMSTEC Secretariat from Connectivity and Security Division, to share these perspectives of BIMSTEC as a grouping which has now got a secretariat in Dhaka, in Bangladesh. So I would turn to Mr. Hajarika for sharing BIMSTEC's perspective on the 2 questions we are discussing in this part of the agenda, on modalities, scope, coverage of cooperation with ESCAP that you consider are important, and how BIMSTEC could work with other sub-regional groupings, and if there is any role for ESCAP to support or assist in that. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all of you. As the Chair said, BIMSTEC is a grouping of 7 countries, 5 from South Asia and 2 from Southeast Asia. And in fact, these 5 countries are also members of SARC, and the 2 countries from the Southeast Asia, they are part of ASEAN. BIMSTEC is a result of convergence of India's Look East policy and Thailand's Look West policy. So the organization came into existence in 1997 with the Bangkok Declaration. Unfortunately, there was no secretariat since 1997 till 2014. Only in 2014, the permanent secretariat was established in Dhaka, Bangladesh. In fact, we don't have a charter yet. We are still working on that document. As you know, BIMSTEC, these member countries, 7 countries, it comprises 1/4 of the world's population and has a combined GDP of US $2.5 trillion. Now, this document, the Bangkok Declaration, without a BIMSTEC charter, the BIMSTEC Declaration is the key document, the principles and the objectives, everything what is laid down in the Bangkok Declaration, those are being followed by the member states. Initially, when the BIMSTEC was established, there were only 4 member countries, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. And it was known as BIS Economic Cooperation. Subsequently, Myanmar has joined, and later on, Nepal and Bhutan have become part of BIMSTEC, and how the BIMSTEC has come into existence. Now, one of the aim and purposes of BIMSTEC is to create an enabling environment for rapid economic development through identification and implementation of specific cooperation projects in the sectors of trade, investment and industry, technology, human resource development, tourism, agriculture, energy and infrastructure and transportation. Initially, when the BIMSTEC was established, there were only six sectors. of cooperation, namely trade and investment, transportation and communication, tourism, technology, energy, and fisheries. Subsequently, 8 more sectors have been added, with the total number now standing at 14 sectors. It's a member-driven organizations. All the member countries, they are leading at particular sector. Now, another aspect of the Bangkok Declaration was to maintain close and beneficial cooperation with existing international and regional organizations with similar aims and purposes. During the initial years of BIMSTEC, ESCAP was actively associated and made significant contribution. ESCAP prepared a document titled BIST EC Development Program Overview and Sectoral Cooperation. And in fact, this document was considered as a key document that would help operationalize the organization. Based on this document, ADB has undertaken a study called BTILS, BIMSTEC Transport Infrastructure and Logistics Study in 2007, which was further enhanced in 2014. But unfortunately, after that, there was no formal or active association of ESCAP with BIMSTEC, though we're now trying to revive the process. In fact, there was no clear direction given to the Secretariat how to go about developing this kind of cooperation with ESCAP or any other international organizations. The 4th BIMSTEC Summit that was held in Kathmandu, Nepal on 30 and 31st of August last year has given a clear direction to the Secretariat in this regard. BIMSTEC Secretariat has been mandated by the member states to initiate collaboration with other regional and international organizations with similar aims and purposes. With this mandate, we have started the process of having a formal MOU with Asian Development Bank. We are already receiving concurrence from the member states, and we are hopeful of operationalizing the MOU very soon. Now, and for ESCAP also, the Secretary General of BIMSTEC, he has made a visit to ESCAP last year, and we're hopeful of having a formal MOU with ESCAP very soon. Now, coming to the issues, those are to be addressed as a part of this session. Then we have got few aspects which I would like to highlight. One of the our views would be forum like ASEAN-UN Comprehensive Partnership may be established for other regional organizations like BIMSTEC. We can also have bilateral dialogue with a definitive periodicity. For example, a BIMSTEC ASEAN dialogue, those may be considered. Another thing could be ESCAP may continue to engage with various regional and multilateral forums by having common dialogue on such matters of interest to these organizations. While member states may continue to participate as sovereign members, BIMSTEC Secretariat or Secretariat of other organizations may participate as special invitees. Secondly, our views is ESCAP or appropriate UN organizations may assist in sharing of best practices. Studies may be carried out to show how various master plans, agreements, frameworks of some of the established regional organizations have performed in meeting the intended objectives and share those with similar regional organizations. ESCAP may also study various master plans, plan of actions of various regional organizations, and suggest how synergy can be developed. In the 4th BIMSTEC Summit, the leaders had one of the key areas that was discussed was the BIMSTEC Master Plan on Transport Connectivity, which we have been developing with the technical assistance of Asian Development Bank. And the leaders have directed that the master plan must develop synergy with similar master plan like ASEAN Master Plan on Connectivity or ECMEC Master Plan on Connectivity. Another area where ESCAP or UN can help the regional organization is capacity development, particularly on subject matters of social sectors and CTTC, that is counter-terrorism and transnational crime. With the assistance of UNOCT, and with the government of the assistance of government of Bangladesh, a couple of capacity development programs on CTTC subjects have been organized by BIMSTEC. We are also working closely with UNODC, particularly on subject matters of drugs and trafficking. We are also discussing with UNDP if some capsules or modules can be developed for BIMSTEC on the subject of social sectors. And the last point which I like to suggest is if some kind of projects-based cooperation between UN ESCAP or UN bodies with other regional organizations like BIMSTEC can be developed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hajarika, for sharing with us how BIMSTEC, when it was created, ESCAP facilitated by creating and sort of substantive discussion or paper and all that, but as the things evolved, the cooperation with ESCAP, between ESCAP and BIMSTEC was not really very actively pursued, but now BIMSTEC has the member states mandate to develop such interaction with other regional organizations, including ADB and ESCAP. And I think we really would work with Secretariat to see that happen and take root. And the areas and ways of means you have highlighted, including the joint capacity development programs, project-based cooperation, are certainly worth looking into, and we will be happy to continue our discussion with the BIMSTEC Secretariat in that connection. Now, I would like to turn to one of the most futuristic and strategic of all regional organizations in Asia and the Pacific region, namely the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And we have Mr. Vladimir Potapenko, the Deputy Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I said straddles across the sub-regions. It has members from the Central Asian republics, the Northeast Asian countries, and now both India and Pakistan having joined it. It becomes really cross sub-regional. So we would be very keen to hear your perspectives or SCO's perspectives on the potential of partnership and collaboration with ESCAP and the key areas of such partnership and how SCO is helping to bring the different sub-regions of Asia Pacific together and facilitate mutual learning, and if ESCAP can play a role in that. So you have the floor, Mr. Potapenko. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's given me immense pleasure to represent the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in this important sub-regional dialogue today. As you are aware, the SCO has become one of the largest, I say trans-regional organization with 43% of world population and 21% of world GDP. The potential of the organization in terms of economic, social, development, cultural, and humanitarian aspect is increasing tremendously. The SCO is making consistent efforts aimed at strengthening regional cooperation to achieve the goals of sustainable development and common prosperity. At the last summit in Tsingtao last year, the head of state emphasized the importance of deepening regional economic cooperation in order to ensure their sustainable social and economic development, including utilizing the potential of the Union Escape in the increase of its activities, transport, energy, trade, and IT. To address the common challenges of the world economy, to ensure economic and financial stability, to support suitable, dynamic, balanced, and inclusive growth in the context of promoting economic globalization, is very important to ensure broader international regional cooperation. At the same time, it is also essential to consistently promote world trade on the basis of the principle of transparency, common interest, and mutual benefits. In this context, the SCO is aimed at addressing the challenges of ensuring transparent, predictable, and stable conditions for the development of trade and economic development and investment cooperation through the strengthening of the mutual trading system based on the rules of the World Trade Organization. Within the SCO, economic cooperation is one of the priorities of the member states. The economic integration of the member is determined by geographical proximity as well as by the agreement and joint development progress in force. The SCO is working towards building a system of regional trade and economic cooperation in order to create an enabling environment for a free movement of goods, capital, service, and technology. SCO believe that the expansion and deepening of the cooperation between the SCO countries in financial, investment, transport, energy, agriculture, and other areas is in the interest of sustainable economic growth of the region as a whole. The implementation of national economic development strategy of the SCO member states in combination with the integration process within the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union and the possibility of establishment of a largest Eurasian partnership involving Asian country will open up broad prospect for a powerful economic breakthroughs in the entire region. The SCO has already expanded its outreach to ASEAN and other regional organizations. The SCO is strongly convinced that the integration of international, regional, and national projects aimed at cooperation in order to ensure joint sustainable development based on the principle of mutual respect, equality, and mutual benefits will contribute to the creation of the new favorable condition for business. This will open up broad prospect and opportunity for investment in infrastructure, transport, communication, trade, and goods and service. In this regard, I would like to highlight that within the expertise assistance of ESCAP, the SCO signed the road transport agreement. The agreement opened up more than 15,000 kilometers of high-speed roads. This provides new opportunities for landlocked countries in the field of trade, economic, transport, and infrastructural cooperation, and contribute to the development of regional connectivity. Similarly, the SCO is working now on concluding an agreement on rail transport. Presently, more than 244,000 kilometers of railway lines are operating in the territory of SCO, and we are hoping for assistance from ESCAP. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Potapenko, for sharing some very interesting thoughts from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which you described as trans-regional organization. Very interesting term.
New words.
New words. And we are hearing actually many new words. Globalization was one. Yes. And the focus of the SCO on strengthening transport connectivity, especially because some of the member states of SCO are landlocked countries. So it becomes very critical, important sector to work on and facilitate the movement of goods and people. And the agreements on road transport and railway agreements that you are working on, and how ESCAP can play a role working with SCO, I think are very interesting thoughts and useful lessons you have put on the table. So with that, thank you very much all the distinguished panelists for addressing the two questions that I posed. Now I would like to go back to all of you. It's the Madam Executive Secretary has done earlier, and which I thought was a very useful thing to do, to just give 1 or 2 minutes to each of you to give some final concluding kind of closing remarks on any thoughts, any, sort of bullet points that you want to share, and then we will close this panel. So maybe I begin again from the right side and go back to colleague from Pacific Islands Forum. You have 1 or 2 minutes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think from the perspective of Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, I'd just like to convey our thanks for this initiative. I think, attending a meeting of this nature, you think, for example, that the Pacific is very congested, but, coming to the Asian region, there's a lot of, sub-regional and regional and trans-regional organizations out there that, I'm not familiar with, and it's something that's very useful in the context of partnerships to learn from the various work that's been done in other areas and to explore opportunities for cooperation and partnerships on issues that where there's alignment. So perhaps those are just some concluding thoughts. And finally, I think there are various lessons learned, and there's definitely opportunities for information sharing and peer-to-peer, self-cooperation and so forth. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Teki. Now, BIMSTEC, Mr. Hajarika.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, it's a good learning experience for me too. A couple of points I'd like to highlight. Maybe this issue of development of hard infrastructure that may remain with the member states, but the soft aspects like carrying out studies, capacity development, if UN ESCAP or other UN bodies can help the member states in this regard. And the second aspects could be development of synergies between the various regional organizations and also their initiatives. So probably UN ESCAP can also, or other UN bodies can play some role in that aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Very useful points. And to you, sir, TCS, so Mr. Lee.
Okay, back to the question of what are we supposed to do for sustainable development of Asian regional cooperation. I firmly believe that the task of pursuing any kind of regional cooperation can be compared to a long journey in search for the conquest of the paradise. Once we arrive the final destination, it will provide enormous opportunities. It is good for everybody, but until we reach a final destination, we may be encountering so many huge challenges, whether we like it or not. So against all odds, we should not give up our own efforts of accumulating the positive momentum to advance toward a better world for our and next generations, the bright future. So it is very important for us to keep our hope very resilient and audacious. Our hope should be more resilient and audacious. So let me conclude my remarks by quoting Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it's done. Or one more thing I'd like to add. Always I keep in mind this phrase. So if one country dream, it may be daydream. But if we dream together, it can turn into our reality. So let's dream together and do not lose any idealistic aspiration for the regional cooperation. In any case, thank you.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring wisdom and quoting Mandela. Dreaming together is what this house is about, and I think this discussion is certainly very much on the track in dreaming together for a prosperous future for all of us. So with that, let me turn to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Mr. Potapenko. Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, but let me speak Russian.
Okay.
Я согласен с коллегами, которые сегодня сделали упор на то, что в сегодняшнем турбулентном мире, когда большинство современных вызовов для безопасности, среди которых терроризм, экстремизм, киберугрозы и контрабанда оружием, не могут быть решены в одиночку даже самыми сильными государствами. Эффективный многосторонний подход сможет помочь и преодолеть тенденцию к закреплению внешнеполитического индивидуализма и односторонности. Многие сегодня страны прибегают к многосторонним площадкам для того, чтобы способствовать укреплению сбалансированной, а не фрагментированной и полицентричности. Современный мир слишком сложен и взаимозависим, чтобы полагаться на какие-то лоскутные одеяла национальных и клубных подходов. Поэтому я еще раз, сегодняшняя наша встреча и разговор был очень эффективный, я считаю. Он подтвердил, что мир все-таки идет к многосторонности, а не к разделению. Спасибо большое.
Thank you, Mr. Potapenko. Again, a very important and inspiring words. World of multipolar world we are heading towards, and no single country can address these insecurities and threats that we are facing. Again, a very resounding support for collective actions, regional cooperation. With that, let me turn to our colleague from SAARC Secretariat, Mr. Sarkar. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Let me go back to what I already said. See, this kind of exchange of information, this kind of forum is very, very important. That should continue, and in fact, there should be a dedicated session to brainstorm initially and then subsequently concretization of these ideas. Because like today, more than before, it is important to go back to our MOUs and redefine and address, like if we need to accommodate diversified interest, but we should work in all mode, formal, informal. If formal is not working, informal with the absolutely in the regime and as per the permissible process. Then we need to also do some studies on certain issues, for example, investment, like to no longer that the direct foreign, all foreign direct investments may not produce as much results as earlier it used to be now, like technology transfer. And so therefore, and then synergies cannot be ignored among the among the various sub-regional organizations and capacity buildings on various issues, on low-hanging fruits, like, for example, a statistical area and other areas where seemingly less divergent. So that should be the priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarkar, for highlighting some of the key issues. With that, distinguished delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the panel discussions part, and of course we will hear the member states, and I will turn the floor to Honorable Chair. We are already, we have overshot the time for this discussion by 5-6 minutes, so I would not really take any more of your time, but what has come out of these two segments of discussion between a number of sub-regional groupings and organizations. What is one single message coming out is that everyone agrees that we need to work together, we need to coordinate our actions, we need to dream together, to use the phrase of a friend from TCS, and collective action addressing shared challenges is always more effective, And in this resource scarce world, the carbon scarce world, we need to not duplicate and coordinate our actions. So we all can work together, and ESCAP as a platform, a broader platform, everyone recognize the importance of bringing these different sub-regional groupings together, so they are not reinventing the wheel individually, but we can coordinate our actions, learn from each other, and make this world and Asia-Pacific region more prosperous for everyone, not leaving anyone behind. On that note, I'd like to close this and invite all of you to join me in thanking and giving a very big round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, may I kindly remind you that the elections on the governing councils are in progress at this moment at the ESCAP hall. Thank you. Until 12:30. Thank you. We have some time for remarks from the delegation, so the floor is now open for any comments. May I ask India, please, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India commends the Secretariat for setting a very contextual agenda which is very relevant to our region, the South Asia. South Asia, though, has made good achievements on the Millennium Development Goals. However, despite a high economic growth, the region lags behind on some of the SDG scores. The SDGs present a unique opportunity to consolidate the progress made on the MDGs, carry forward the unfinished development agenda, and capitalize on the transformational opportunity provided by the 2030 agenda to leapfrog into inclusive and sustainable development pathways that leave no one behind. It is well recognized that without South Asia achieving the SDG targets, the global SDG targets cannot be achieved, as we are still a large global mass of poverty, inequality, child malnutrition, lack of decent jobs. It is therefore important that ESCAP gives special attention to this sub-region. We believe that intergovernmental organizations like ESCAP can supplement efforts in assisting countries of South Asia in achieving the SDGs. ESCAP, through its sub-regional offices, should also complement the work of regional organizations such as SAARC, BIMSTEC, and fill the gaps when such organizations are not effective in fostering regional cooperation. Collaboration among institutions like SAARC, ASEAN, BIMSTEC, etc., for exchanging best practices and developmental experiences is therefore important and can be facilitated by ESCAP. Mr. Chair, India is committed to shared prosperity of South Asia and has taken many steps to improve conditions in its neighboring countries, especially the LDCs. India has also the free trade agreement with ASEAN, is a member of the East Asia Summit, and is participating in RCEP negotiations as we talk. India is also a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as was rightly mentioned. We are happy to share that each of these engagements have given us new dimension and different experiences. It is important that ESCAP, through its sub-regional offices, work together with member states to share the best practices and knowledge so as to benefit everybody. At this opportunity, Mr. Chair, I would like to share the unique tool that India has developed for measuring the progress of governments and countries towards achieving the 169 SDG targets which are embodied in the UN resolution on Agenda 2030, called the SDG India Index. It is a unique and comprehensive tool which measures the distance to SDG targets achieved by subnational governments in India and could easily be used in a larger scale for the entire region for better evidence-based policy making in the different member states of ESCAP. I would also like to take this opportunity to brief the forum about a transformational public procurement initiative, the e-marketplace, evolved recently by the government for enabling the government procurements through a complete, transparent, and optimal, efficient, and inclusive process. This GEM portal leverages technology to completely automate the system of procurement and processes to bring greater accountability in public procurement across the country. The GEM portal promotes inclusiveness by catapulting various categories of sellers and service providers, such as medium and small-scale enterprises, startups, domestic manufacturing, women entrepreneurs, self-help groups, and urban livelihood missions. We would be happy to share our experiences in facilitating and promoting such sustainable and inclusive public procurement initiatives by developing countries in the Asia-Pacific region, which would enable us to bridge the digital divide. Mr. Chair, India remains committed to enhancing contribution to South-South cooperation in accordance with our means and on the basis of the agreed principles and norms. Multilateral avenues, we reiterate, based on consensus, remain the far more effective means to achieve inclusive development-oriented outcomes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, India. Pakistan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to appreciate the timely and thorough report generated by ESCAP on this agenda item, which provides us a good basis for discussion. The report has correctly outlined that the South Asian sub-region accounts for a disproportionately high share of poverty and other deprivations. Given its weight in global population and its share in global poverty, the world will not be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without South Asia achieving them. The sub-region's success in implementing the goals hinges on addressing current capacity gaps and strengthening the means of implementation through regional cooperation. The government of Pakistan has accorded highest priority to the empowerment of people and ensuring their inclusiveness and equality. A revised social protection policy framework has been instituted to focus efforts for a harmonized approach for all Pakistanis, leaving no one behind. A national poverty alleviation program, EHSAS, Urdu word for compassion, has been launched this year to expand social protection, safety nets, and support human capital development throughout the country. This program complements and expands the ongoing robust social protection program, Benazir Income Support Program for poor women. Our resolve and commitment to eliminate poverty is firm. The size of assistance for the lowest strata has been enhanced. The National Socioeconomic Registry is being updated to target the poorest more effectively and ensure that no one is left behind. Mr. Chair, to address gender inequality, the government of Pakistan has promulgated various laws, policies, strategies to eliminate all forms of discrimination and end violence against women and girls. At national level, 4 bills and at provincial level, 9 bills have been passed. Innovation Challenge Fund focused on supporting female entrepreneurs in Pakistan has been initiated to promote access to finance for micro, small, and medium-sized businesses by employing technology-enabled solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pakistan. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of Bangladesh, I thank all the panelists for their valuable information and inputs on different regional activities. Mr. Chair, inequality and exclusions are always right issues. Even food, water, healthcare, education, housing, and access to justice are not just commodities or facilities. These are also rights issues to which all human beings are entitled to. The 2030 Agenda is once again a vital opportunity to realize the promise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and similar other declarations. It explicitly recognizes that realization of all human rights, namely civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, will empower people and ensure their inclusiveness and equality, and it is the only way to construct more equal, resilient, and sustainable societies. Our region, South Asia, faces numerous challenges in establishing rights and assuring access for all. During the different meetings under ESCAP, the countries of the region mentioned specific challenges and emerging issues such as conflict, resource challenges, insecurity, climate change, vulnerabilities, water graduation, post-graduation challenges, disaster risk, and economic vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities emanating from external and internal shocks and dispersed population, high transaction or project cost, lack of awareness regarding SDGs, and absence of local indicators to help localize the SDGs. Yet, the regional cooperation is found to be weak in South Asia. In spite of some spectacular development on record, South Asia still accounts for 36% of the world's poor and unacceptably high rates of undernourishment, child stunting, child wasting, and child mortality among different regions of the world. Share of vulnerable employment in the sub-region is relatively high at roughly 72%. Existence of social barriers to women entering the workforce account for low rates of female labor force participation, and it prevents the sub-region from achieving its true economic growth potential. To overcome these challenges, the individual members of the region must do well if the infrastructure spending is accelerated, rural development is promoted, social protection programs expanded and improved, more investment is done in human capital, and corruption and criminality are reduced if not removed totally. Also, collaborating across borders, given the massive investment required for achieving the SDGs, harnessing public-private partnership, greater engagement in the civil society, and collaborations with international organizations such as UN and other development partners are needed. The member states also need to focus on the role of frontline public servants such as teachers, health workers, and the police in delivering accountable and responsive services. New digital tools will enable new forms of direct participation in public life of the marginalized population, and above all, women's participation and leadership in our societies must be achieved. In Bangladesh, we believe that with adequate ability and opportunity, people will not be job seekers, they will be job creators. Further, the nation Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman incorporated a promise in Article 16 of our Constitution in 1972 that states shall adopt effective measures to bring about a radical transformation in rural areas, mainly to achieve inclusiveness and equality. For SDG implementation, Mr. Chair, we have an open web-based SDG implementation tracker to monitor progress, and this is being replicated in some other developing countries and LDCs. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, I thank ESCAP for including this issue in the agenda, and ESCAP South and Southwest Office for helping us with organization of Inception workshop in Dhaka on 28 to 30 April, and a possible third South Asia SDG Forum in Dhaka, focusing on sub-regional cooperation in SDG achievement very soon. I thank you all.
Thank you, Bangladesh. Samoa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier in the week, the President of Nauru and Chair for the Pacific Island Forum delivered a very strong statement, emphasizing the inherent vulnerabilities and the unique challenges faced by our small and isolated island nations. Narrow resource base, climate change, oceans management, geographic dispersion, high transportation costs, isolation from markets, and the list goes on. Many of the key priorities for us in the Pacific sub-region are the very issues that touch the very heart of our existence. Climate change is the single greatest threat to our very survival. Climate change and disaster risks affect our people in many ways, including increased severe weather events, scarcity of food and water, and displaced communities. Natural catastrophes can destroy an entire country, bringing upheaval to the lives of our people, as well as major setbacks for the national economy for years. Mr. Chair, focus should be on accessing adequate resources to effectively respond to climate change. We need economy-wide adaptation to climate change approaches, which incorporates disaster risk reduction, integration of climate change adaptation, and risk mitigation into the region's strategies for financing development, as a means to safeguard our infrastructure and fragile economies and enhance resilience of our people against pressing climate impacts. Mr. Chair, SIDS share much in common. However, each SIDS sub-region has its own particular challenges and opportunities. And for the Pacific sub-region, much of these stem from its largest shared resource, the Pacific Ocean, which comprises over 95% of sovereign territory. Based on our shared ocean identity, geography, and resources, our Pacific Island Forum leaders endorsed in 2017 the Blue Pacific, a banner, as the core driver of our collective regional action. The Blue Pacific recognizes our collective potential and our shared stewardship of the Pacific Ocean. For Samoa and the people of the Blue Pacific continent, the ocean is core and central to our way of life. The marine resources and ecosystems provide a solid foundation for sustainable development for our island states. They are a source of livelihoods and incomes for our communities and governments and are a key base upon which our economies are built, especially with reliance on sectors such as tourism and fisheries. Mr. Chair, Samoa would like to see enhanced opportunities in green growth, establishing and maintaining viable and diversified economic development bases and value-added industries in fisheries, tourism, and agriculture. Renewable energy, securing affordable, adequate, and safe energy supplies. Non-communicable diseases is a silent killer in our part of the region. Attention should be focused on intensifying multi-sector efforts and financial commitments to address pressing health issues with specific emphasis on NCDs. The need to capitalize on connectivity and IT is crucial to enable more economic opportunity and empowerment. Added to this is developing and maintaining cost-effective infrastructure to engage with the global community and its markets and to support socio-economic priorities. Mr. Chair, it is important that we capitalize on all opportunities that advance the Pacific sub-regional agenda through sustained cooperation, strategic and genuine partnerships, collective action, and financial commitments. For the Pacific sub-region, we clearly stand apart in the context of capacity constraints and the need to build and strengthen our limited human resource base, systems, and institutional strengthening. The utilization of government systems and procedures, or close alignment as much as possible to national systems, is an approach we wish to highlight. Multilateral partners to shift programming modalities of their cooperation activities from discrete projects to sector programs with funding either through sector or general budget support. Budget support allows for full national ownership of the decision process relating to resource mobilization. Mr. Chair, the welcome call to leave no one behind means major adjustments to the way data is produced, made available, and analyzed. We emphasize, therefore, the need to increase investments in national statistical systems and disaggregated data. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Samoa. Fiji, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Mr. Chairman, the 2030 Agenda's central aspiration of leaving no one behind requires prioritization of interests and also realignment of national, regional, and global processes. As we heard from Mr. Tekiteki earlier, we in the Pacific aligned ourselves to this, and with the endorsement of the Pacific leaders are implementing the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development. These priorities are also reflected in the countries with special needs report, in particular climate change, sustainable management of the oceans, and disaster risk reduction. They also share some commonalities with LLDCs and LDCs. Achieving these require appropriate mechanisms for us to access the means of implementation, and development partners can play a very significant role. By incorporating a stronger focus on risk and resilience into the region's strategies for financing development, in building our adaptive capacities and continue to invest in climate adaptation for our infrastructure and economies, utilizing opportunities in green growth, renewable energy, fisheries, tourism and agriculture as noted in CSN report, taking advantage of advances on ICT and connectivity like sustainable transport, enabling more economic opportunities and empowerment, enhancing gender equality and opportunities for women, youth, the elderly, and persons with disabilities, intensifying multi-sector efforts, particularly for health, education, and culture, and financing for addressing the NCD's crisis in the Pacific, and addressing the issues around de-risking and its impact on remittances flows to the Pacific. Furthermore, development partners can also build on our capacities, systems, and institutions for planning, budgeting, public financial, and aid management. And in the context of South-South and Triangular Cooperation, look within the Pacific to find Pacific solutions, expand and scale up Pacific South-South cooperation and peer-to-peer learning. Using more Pacific businesses and experts in implementation of their programs and projects where the expertise and capacity is available. And given that less than 42% of donors use our country's systems, there's a need to reduce fragmentation and deliver more assistance through our country systems. And finally, in increasing investment in national statistical systems and disaggregated data, which is an urgent priority for us. My delegation wishes also to reiterate the UNDS report recommendations, especially the strengthening of regional and sub-regional intergovernmental forums to further engage member states and other stakeholders on region-specific issues that may require collective action. This sub-regional dialogue involving the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat is a step in the right direction, and we would like to see it strengthened and expanded. And secondly, report annually on system-wide results of the United Nations at the regional level in support of the 2030 Agenda to be coordinated by the regional commissions with support from the Development Coordination Office. We also continue to support the monitoring and reporting role of ESCAP under the 2030 Agenda and the Samoa Pathway. We acknowledge the coordination and substantive role of ESCAP in the midterm review of the Samoa Pathway. And finally, Chair, we appreciate the contributions that ESCAP made to the Pacific Sustainable Development Report 2018 and to the SG's report on the implementation of the Samoa Pathway. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, PG. Tuvalu, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I think the previous speakers from the Pacific had well alluded to support what the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat Director Sione Tekiteki has said. So to that, I don't want to give repetition of what had been said, but the support all had been alluded to by the former speakers representing the Pacific region. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Tuvalu. Bhutan, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the delegation from Bhutan, I would like to convey the Royal Government's appreciation to ESCAP in assisting Bhutan towards its path to achieving the SDGs. ESCAP has been facilitating exchanges of learning and experiences at the sub-regional and regional levels. I would like to also convey our appreciation to the assistance provided by ESCAP's Sub-Regional Office in New Delhi for providing capacity building workshop organized in Dhaka focused on LDC graduation, and the ESCAP WTO Regional Workshop on Graduation for Least Developed Countries in Asia in April 29 in Bangkok. Both meetings were very useful for Bhutan since the focus had been on LDC graduation. The Royal Government is looking forward to hosting similar workshop in Bhutan focused on LDC graduation, which will help focus greater attention on challenges faced by Bhutan in its graduation process and what it can learn from the experiences from other countries in South Asia and beyond. Mr. Chair, for the successful achievement of SDGs in Bhutan and to address issues related with graduation to middle-income country, it is important that we build institutions and think tanks which can support government in formulating policies that are evidence-based. Bhutan is looking at collaborating with ESCAP in establishing a think tank in Bhutan on development issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Bhutan, Kazakhstan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are confident that sub-regional cooperation and trans-organizational interaction play a vital role in achieving sustainable development goals. Kazakhstan is an active participant of almost all integration organizations in the Eurasian continent. We are the author of creating a couple of them, including the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia. But let me say a few words about another initiative. It is a special program for economies for Central Asia plus Afghanistan and Azerbaijan, which is established in 1998. We have now 6 acting project working groups. They are on trade, water and energy resources, transport and border crossing simplification, statistics, information communications technologies, gender issues in economy. It is managed by the Board of Governors. We have already held 13 meetings, and we annually hold economic forums. SPECA unites 7 countries in strengthening regional cooperation and is becoming an important actor in issues of socio-economic cooperation between the developing countries. Now we are working on opening the Secretariat in Kazakhstan, and we expect the United Nations ESCAP leadership and the respectful member countries to assist in the further promotion of SPECA and look forward for the future support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. Nepal, you have the floor.
First of all, our delegation is happy to acknowledge the work done by ESCAP, Subregional Office in assisting Nepal in its effort in the area of capacity development of public and private sector stakeholders. We look forward to further work in this direction. Our delegation feels that for South Asia and especially the LDC issues relating to market access, continued spatial and differential treatment, cross-border connectivity, poverty reduction, and mitigating climate change risks are very important. Nepal has suffered a lot due to the earthquake, which hit us a few years ago, and we are almost in the last stage of recovering from its aftermath. We realize that inter-regional assistance is very important towards the faster recovery from such disaster. Collaboration among institutions like SAARC, ASEAN, and BIMSTEC, etc., for learning best practices and exchange program can be facilitated by ESCAP, which can border presence and membership. Even ESCAP has been already working on regional connectivity, regional trade, cooperation, and achieving the sustainable development goal, etc. We think that it is equally important that cooperation between other sub-regional institutions like SAARC, BIMSTEC, and other needed to foster the implementation process of the mentioned issues. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nepal. If there are no more delegations wishing to take the floor, may I please draw attention to draft decisions 25 and 26 as contained in CRP 1. Do I take it that we can recommend draft decisions 25 and 26 for adoption? It is so decided. At this time, we shall break for lunch and reconvene this afternoon at 2 p.m. sharp, where we will take up agenda items 6 through 10. But before I adjourn the meeting, I understand the Secretariat has some announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder to all delegates that the Governing Council elections are currently underway. These will be held until 12:30 and the venue is ESCAP Hall. On the side events, we bring to you two important side events today. The first of this is entitled Graduation, International Support Measures and Leveraging Inclusive and Sustainable Development, which has been organized by Bangladesh. This event will start at 12:30 in Conference Room 4 on Level 1. The second side event today has been organized by the governments of the United Kingdom, Belgium, and Sweden, and the ESCAP Secretariat, entitled Road Safety, Global Perspectives, and Local Cooperation. This side event will start at 12:45 in Meeting Room A, also in Level 1 of the Conference Center. May I also remind all participants that in addition to our regular catering services on Level 1, we also have a number of OTOP vendors offering authentic Thai food near the garden area. So if you have not tried these, I encourage you to try them today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Secretariat. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.